Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to Bazel Bootcamp at BazelCon 2019. I am Kyle Cordes. I work at Oasis Digital. I am supported and assisted today by several people. Is Lance in here? There's a Lance, there's a Chris. Is there a Chris in here? Okay, great. So there are a couple of people that will step in later. There are a couple of points here today where we're going to have a chance to do some hands-on. And there are a couple of extra people to help if anyone is stuck. This is who we are. Everyone loves these slides, but I hate them, so I move on. We're going to do a very short intro. And then we're going to just repeat looking at code, explaining the code, and discussing the code. So you can sort of think of this bootcamp session as a counterpoint to what's going on in the main room, where everything in the main room assumes that you basically already know like all the subtext, all the context. And in here, we're going to just assume, even though it's probably false because we're at BazelCon, that people don't know the context and meaning. We're going to go over the meaning of specific files and lines and why they're there. So briefly, a reminder of why all this matters. The problem that we're solving with Bazel, building big things is slow, and building slow is expensive. I have some slides left over from when a much longer version of today's session will be offered as an actual commercial class. In that context, there may be people in the room who don't even know if they want to Bazel, but I'm going to assume that everyone in the room knows they want to Bazel and knows why. And so I may touch on some of these points along the way, and you can certainly ask questions, but I'm not going to waste any minutes saying why you should care about a thing that you literally got in a plane or car to come to a conference about. Reminder of the context, though, is that Bazel is aimed at technologically demanding problems. And so many of the details of why things are the way they are end up tying back to the context in which this tool is intended to be used. There are things where, for a small project, you might wonder, why is this miserable complexity here? And the answer is, it's not for small projects. It's for big, complex things. Can anyone raise your hand if you're familiar with the idea of a build pipeline? OK, so I will not spend time on that. Everyone who does an introduction to Bazel has a slide listing some subset of these approximately 10 points. The one I like to bring up on this is the word functional. I don't see that word listed very often on Bazel pitch slides, but I think that's a really good word to get an understanding that a build step and a build process should be functional in the sense of the output is a pure function of its inputs. I have found that using the word functional often helps people understand why we're dealing with certain kinds of details in a Bazel build process. So I would suggest that to anyone who has to be a champion of this in their organization, use the word functional a lot. OK, there is a happy path with Bazel. I don't think any of the talks that we've seen are about anyone on the happy path, because they're all the sort of people who come here and offer expert level talks are people who have done things like build a bunch of custom tooling and that sort of thing. But there is a not too narrow, but reasonably good happy path for Bazel, where you are using a language, typically Java, Go, whatever, where someone else is doing a great job maintaining a bunch of rules. And you maybe have done it before. I think a lot of people in the Google, like the Exugler group, I don't know how to say that word. I feel like Bazel is often driven to adoption by people who experienced Google's internal version of the tool. So it really helps a lot if you've lived in that ecosystem. That's part of the happy path. And if you're using a set of tools where somebody else, some automated machinery, is creating build files for you, so that's the happy path. We're going to start by looking at a happy path. But realistically, people that are working at a scale of problem where they need Bazel probably are not on the narrow happy path. And that's the idea here. So start with the happy path and broaden out a little bit from there to the things that are somewhat less happy. And lastly, I think this is my last slide with significant words on it. Again, the point of Bazel is to handle big things. So you have to be able to do things like split your compiler load across many machines and cache interims, share that cache between a CI and a bunch of developers and so on. Other people are talking about that. But underlying all of that is the notion that your individual steps have to have these well-defined inputs and outputs. right? So all of the great things that can be done with Bazel, like at the macro level, depend on getting rules done right at the micro level. And so for Bootcamp, we're going to be working at the macro level. We're not going to set up splitting compile loads across machines, but we're going to look at the details that make it possible to do that. Most of those details live in these 3 types of files. A Bazel workspace is a nested group of directories with a workspace file at the top. Right now, that file is usually named workspace. It will soon usually be named workspace.bazel. There's typically a build.bazel file, many of those scattered through a project. Those used to be called build, but then as Bazel escaped from Google, it was discovered that many, many, many projects and tools out there like having a directory laying around named build. And especially if you go touch Windows or Mac with a case-insensitive file system, if anywhere in your entire system you're using something with the name build in lowercase, and you go try to put in a file called build in uppercase, you get this collision. And so already, I think a lot of the ecosystem has switched to using build.bazel as the name of the build file, and it's a convention that we'll follow here. Lastly, as soon as you get past just using what's there off the shelf, you have to start writing your own BZL files. So basically, the top things are about using Bazel things, and the BZL files are about making Bazel things. And that's the level of depth we will reach by the end of this morning, is just starting to touch writing your own BZL files. So, any questions before we jump into code? So I like to ask a couple of questions myself. So raise your hand if you're working in a project right now that's using Bazel, the building with Bazel. Okay, it's about 40% of the room. Raise your hand if you are currently responsible for the Bazel on a project. So basically, if you're an expert in the room, so experts in the room, feel free to heckle. It's an open invitation. OK, so I don't like talks with a lot of slides. I like talks with a lot of code. So we will jump into that. I'm using VS Code for my IDE. There's nothing particularly Bazel-y about that. It's just what I use, because a lot of my work is front-end and full-stack JavaScript-y stuff. And that is where VS Code is most popular. Can I get a font size check? Somebody in the back of the room, tell me, how's my font size? Do I need to go up? Back row? OK. OK, so the way I like to start is by talking through a working example. If you want to follow along, if you want to run this code locally, it's published here. So I don't know. It's unfortunately, I guess the URL part is hard to read. How can I make that big? Does anybody know the magic keystrokes to make that big? I mean, I have a hacky workaround. There we go. That's a little bigger now. So if you want to follow along, go clone this repo. I'll give a minute for people to type it in before I take it. Next question. Raise your hand if you have Bazel installed on your computer. Raise your hand if you don't have Bazel installed on your computer. Wow, only one. Fantastic. With only one not having it installed, we will skip past spending a lot of time on that. And instead, I will point you to go to bazel.build, the website, go to the documentation, go to the part about installation, and follow the recommendations for whatever OS you are on. So again, this is a condensed version of something we're looking to offer as a full-length commercial training endeavor. And in that one, there will be a very long amount of time making sure everyone is set up. But we're at BazelCon, so I'm assuming everybody's up and running. OK, so once you have checked that out, let me see here. You'll be able to follow along. So this thing you're checking out, it's an unusually shaped repository, because instead of having one project in it, it potentially has 8 projects in it. Only the first 5 are populated. And only if things go very well today will we get to the 5th. So 1 through 4 or 1 through 5, for each of these is a fully working standalone Bazel example. And so our path here will be to review them, discuss them, get them running, and make a little edit to them in order. Trying to spot. Yeah, there's a couple of seats open back there. There's a couple up in the front row. No one ever wants the front row. OK, so for context, if you're following along, whatever IDE or editor you're using, we are looking at this repository, and we're going to start in this directory. I put a number at the beginning. The number is nothing Bazel-y about the number. The number is so that they sort in the order we're going to look at them. So we're going to look at what's inside this one up and running. This is, to my mind anyway, the smallest, reasonably correct, complete Bazel project. OK, so can I get a show of hands of people that have the code down if they're going to? OK, good. So we can go on. So unfortunately, we have to start the discussion of Bazel by going back a step before Bazel, of how does the right version, how does the intended version of Bazel get up and running on your computer? So while my first line advice is always go to the documentation and follow what it says to install, I would then follow it up and say, if you're not using Basilisk, you should be using Basilisk. So Basilisk is the Bazel analog of, like a RVM, Ruby Version Manager, NVM, Node Version Manager, and that same idea that 100 different projects have reinvented. Basically, you put a little file in your project, and you use this layer of indirection tool that makes sure that you are running the version of the tool that file says. So the first thing I always look for in any Bazel project is the presence of a Bazel version file. There's work, I believe, just went in the last couple of weeks that will make the Debian package also respect the Bazel version file, even without using Basilisk, which is great. I see someone nodding. Is that because you were involved in it, or because, OK. I'm wondering at one point I'll say something, and someone will raise their hand and say, I wrote that, and you're wrong. So Bazel's pretty serious. It's gotten very serious this year about semantic versioning. And so I have taken the bold step of running on a 2.0 release candidate, knowing that there's breaking changes. But I've looked at what those breaking changes are, and they have no effect whatever on anything we're going to see at the level of material today. And so I feel it's safe to go ahead and use a 2.0 release candidate. My impression from talking with folks here is there's actually quite a lot of substantial projects that are not yet on 1.0. So very little of what we see today is like significantly or structurally different from older versions. But I like to always demonstrate or teach on the very latest thing I possibly can, because that's closer to what someone will be using if they start trying to use this like 3 months from now. Like 3 months from now, 2.0 will have long shipped, and like it'll be the standard version everyone is using. So we're on 2. OK, so if I were to type the command Bazel, on my computer, the command Bazel actually runs the Basilisk program. It will look at this Bazel version file. It will download the actual Bazel executable if needed, and then redirect to it. So when I type a Bazel command, which I haven't done yet, I will be running Bazel version 200 RC3 without me having to go make sure that I downloaded that exact version. This is a great idea to do, because you really want to make sure that everybody on the team is just using the Bazel version that you want them to be using. The next thing that will happen, so once Bazel starts running, so again, any Bazel command, Bazel to build, just Bazel to ask what version it is, doesn't matter. The Bazel command will look at this Bazel RC file. This Bazel RC file contains sort of top-level configuration for the Bazel program. Now, I have seen example programs published that don't have a Bazel RC file, and that's totally legit. But as far as I can tell, every significantly complex use of Bazel in the real world involves a fairly complex Bazel RC file. So I would recommend getting to know the Bazel RC file very well. I've included one here because in my tiny set of example programs, I'm getting benefit from this Bazel RC file. And just to skip ahead slightly, if you look at one of the examples, you'll see that it has the same set of cache settings in it. So what these cache settings do is they establish a place on my local disk where Bazel can put two of its types of caches, repository caches and its more general disk cache. By doing this, if I'm building more than one project with Bazel, they will share a cache. Whereas by default, if you have, say, 6 projects on your system that are building with Bazel, they will each make their own cache directory inside your home directory. And so if you have to download a bunch of stuff for an upgrade on one of them, you'll have to do it again on the next project as you switch. So if you work on more than one project, this is kind of the minimum I would do in a Bazel RC. There's a lot more you can do with caching. There'll be other advanced talks in the main room about, I think, isn't there one about like shared caching? I don't remember the exact schedule. But the minimum that I would do is if I'm ever going to work on more than one project, I would decide to share the cache. Actually, I want to ask, I saw someone taking a picture. I'm going to point out all the files I'm showing you are in the repository. So every single thing I show you, you have. Yeah, go ahead.
So this approach might also cause collision if we are doing certain builds. Are you making an assumption over here where this is?
So it could, but these caches, I believe they're based on the content hashes. So you'd have to get pretty unlucky. I think you'd have to be pretty unlucky, wouldn't you, to have a cache collision? Yeah, yeah. It's a content addressable cache. Like the cache key is like a secure hash of the contents of what it's caching. So you'd have to get quite unlucky to have a cache conflict. I mean, it's possible. OK, so again, I'm talking you through just the first time someone runs Bazel at all. The next thing that happens, once this kind of general configuration has happened, is Bazel is now looking at your workspace. So this is where we jump into the middle of it. This is where it gets deep. So the workspace defines, I saw this expressed really well online recently. The workspace is about getting stuff from the outside world into your Bazel project. And the build files are about what's going to happen inside your Bazel project. So if you just look around the source code here, you'll see that I have a tremendously complex program here. It is 39 lines of Go code. So this is what we're building in this first up and running example. Of course, in any real project, the source code is going to be 1,000 times bigger than all the build machinery. But in my tiny project, I do apologize that my workspace setup file is longer than all of the source code. That's just one of the things that happens. You build a tiny example. OK, so I'm going to get a show of hands. You know Go. Raise your hand if you know Go. That is what I expected. One of the big challenges when picking up Bazel things to learn or to teach to others is what language to use first. I chose Go to use first, even guessing that that would be the show of hands for people that know Go, because the Go rules in Bazel are especially, like they're an especially full like realization of the vision of what Bazel should be. Like the Go rules are really good. And so even though hardly anybody knows Go, we're just going to gloss over that. You'll have to trust me that if you look at this, it shows a list of, if you run this, it shows a list of groceries on the screen. So hopefully everybody's familiar enough, at least some programming language, to kind of guess what this code does a little bit. OK, so we're now looking back at our workspace file. So this is where we're going to go retrieve stuff from the outside world to make it possible to compile and run this Go program. I have found it most helpful to just go through line by line. Please interrupt me with questions at any moment. OK, this is a Go workspace. We usually start by giving that workspace a name. You don't have to give a workspace a name. It's OK to have kind of an anonymous workspace. But I have found it to be a good practice to give a workspace a name. There are certain cases where deep inside your build files, that workspace name will have to appear. So I suggest giving it a name that will be at least somewhat unique in case you have to grep your entire source code for it. So I've tried to give these names that are unlikely to show up as like a language identifier. Definitely don't give it a name like Workspace or a name like Bazel or something like that. Because trust me, you will eventually have to grep your entire code base for the name of your workspace. And so make it something unique. OK, so now we have a workspace and it has a name. So has anyone thought, what is a workspace yet? Well, a workspace is like basically some files in a somewhat virtual file system. It'll become more clear later. This workspace starts with theoretically nothing in it. I'm going to say a workspace has nothing in it. You should think of a workspace as starting with nothing in it as of line 2. Now, in reality, Bazel is a very path-dependent feature set because it emerged from an internal Google tool. So in fact, there's a bunch of stuff in this workspace. There's a bunch of built-in stuff in this workspace. That's so that old legacy things at Google that rely on there being a bunch of stuff in the workspace by default don't break. But we're going to think of it as though this workspace is currently empty. So I would like to load stuff into this workspace. Now, where am I going to load that from? What I'd actually like to do is I'd like to load it just from somewhere on the web. Well, loading code into this workspace from somewhere on the web is not a built-in. It's not something built in, because that's not something that they did historically at Google. Historically at Google, they had all of the source code checked into the world's largest mono repository. Most of us and the rest of the world fetch at least some dependencies from outside. So I need some way to fetch those. Well, the tool to fetch those is called HTTP archive. On line 3, we are loading it, and on line 7, we're using it. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going on lines 3 and 7. Firstly, this syntax will be more or less weird to you depending on languages you've used. So I've probably used 20 programming languages. In almost all of them, there's a fairly big divide between strings and language identifiers. There are a few languages where there is not such a divide, and this is one of them. This language is called Starlark, by the way. We'll say that word a lot more later. But in this language, this may be alien to you if you haven't used like Go or Python, but the word HTTP archive in here becomes a language identifier by line 7. So you could sort of think of this line as equivalent to like if you're a JavaScript sort of person, sort of think of it as some sort of path like that. Or if you're a Java kind of person, import com.whatever.star. So you can sort of think of it as being something like that, depending on what languages you're familiar with. But you should read this load as if it's an import statement. So it's saying, from somewhere, go import this thing. Now, this thing is called a label. It looks like a string to me. The way Bazel works, labels are sitting inside a string syntax. So that's a label. Now, we'll have to talk a lot about what these labels mean over time. But this is a keyword you should be looking for. Bazel tools. Bazel tools is the name of the pile of built-in tools that just ship with Bazel. So at Bazel tools actually means reach into another workspace or another repository called Bazel tools. But you sort of just have to know that Bazel tools is the name of the built-in kit. You can actually look if you look in the source code for Bazel, there's literally a directory in it, Bazel tools, and has a subdirectory tools and a subdirectory build def. So you could go read the exact meaning of this thing. That doesn't matter. But just know whenever you see Bazel tools, I'm reaching into the built-in toolbox inside Bazel and grabbing something and making it available to use in this workspace. So at this place inside the built-in kit, there's a thing called HTTP archive. We're going to go get it. Now we have it. Since we have it, let's use it. So you should think of this as being equivalent to some lines of a Maven POM or some lines of a package JSON file. Actually, I want to get some familiar. Raise your hand if you know Java and Maven. Raise your hand if you know Python. How about JavaScript ecosystem people? Ooh, the smallest number. Bummer. OK, try not to use too many JavaScript ecosystems. Say again?
The sidebar.
How do I do that?
Command B.
Command? I want to kill the thing on the right.
Yeah, that's me.
Under view.
I can turn.
Show me
Appearance.
at the bottom.
Where is it at?
Left.
There we go, OK. See, most of the time, I present code in languages where I can do pretty tight word wrapping to deal with the inevitable problem of big fonts in the back row. But unfortunately, there are just some really long strings in here. So yeah, I guess I can just go back and forth with this. I hate doing that, because I hate losing the context. Right? I really don't like to be showing code where people can't tell where that code is, but I guess I'll have to because of the constraints and the size and so on. OK, so HTTP archive, this is a use of the HTTP archive tool that we just that we just imported. So we imported a tool, and now we're going to use it. There's a general pattern. Whenever in a workspace you call something and you state a name, this is the name under which the thing that you are invoking will become available in the workspace. So we're going to go grab some stuff, and this describes how to grab it. And then once we've grabbed it, we're going to refer to it by this name. I could edit this name if I wanted. Now, if you go to the projects where these various tools come from, they always suggest a way to import their tool and use it. I have found it a good practice to always import it under the name they suggest, so that so your code looks like everybody else's code. But if I really wanted to, I could name it after myself or something. So I'm going to fetch things with HTTP. In this example nicely gives two alternate URLs here. A question that always comes up, people always ask, hey, in my org, they like us to fetch stuff locally. Yeah, you could just go retrieve that file, and you could audit it or review it however you wanted. You could store it on a server wherever you wanted, and you can put in a URL to it. So there's no requirement that these be HTTP versus HTTPS. There's no requirement that they be reaching outside world. You can put any URL you want. This is just like the default. If I go look at the documentation for the Go rules, this is where they are sitting on the internet to go grab. And then a lot of these, you'll see them, they mention this Bazel mirror. As I understand, this is an artifact of how the CI is performed. So the Bazel team runs a CI of making sure a whole bunch of these rules will all work on the current version of Bazel as it gets developed. As I understand, that CI machine is not allowed to go fetch stuff off the internet. And so they go prefetch the rules and put them into the Bazel mirror so that their own CI can always be fetching from a machine down in the same rack or whatever. It's not really. It's on Google Storage. Yeah.
Is that method of referring to an external dependency or URL to a tar.gz, is that more a Go thing or is that more a Bazel thing?
That is definitely a Bazel thing. And it's not the only way to do it, but it's the way that all the documentation shows it. So it's the way I show first. We will see a couple other ways over time. Yeah.
When it's trying to get the artifact, will it go in order? So it'll do the first URL and the second URL?
I believe that is what it does. I got the AV guys looking at me. Am I good?
Yeah. For the report, would you be able to repeat people's questions if you have
Yeah, actually, can someone who works with me volunteer to run a microphone around? You have to ask him what you have to do to make it actually work. OK, the question was, are they tried in order? To my knowledge, they are tried in order. But I have not experimented with monitoring my machine's network traffic to verify that. But I believe that's the case. OK, any more questions on this? OK, so why are we starting with just grabbing something by HTTP, right? So the literal answer is, well, that's what all the examples show. But the semantic answer behind the scenes is, we haven't even loaded tooling for any particular programming language ecosystem, right? So we can't use Go's package management. We can't use Maven package management. We can't use some package management system to retrieve the rules for these because we haven't loaded that in. Bazel arrives as just a sort of blank slate, ready for you to pour support into whatever language you're using. And so you should think of these first few as bootstrapping your workspace. And then once you've bootstrapped your workspace, then we'll do more specific things that don't feel quite as generic to do later work. Okay, so we've learned how HTTP archive works. It goes and gets some stuff and makes it available under this name. We're not going to go into what Bazel is for, other than to point out Bazel is an example of a tool that writes your build files for you. So I remember I said on the happy path, you don't really have to mess with the build files yet because it's a tool that does it for you. If you're working with Go, and if you're following the sort of standard practices for Go directory layouts, it does most of the work for you. If your program works off the shelf with the Go command line tool in a straightforward way, it'll probably just work with Bazel, making it, kind of bringing it to the Bazel word for you. So I wanted this for some bit that we'll see a little later, and I wanted to demonstrate another use of HTTP archive, so there it is. You'll see that these are all protected by I guess a SHA-256 is still considered a cryptographically secure hash. As long as those quantum computers don't make it out, it should be good for a number of more years. So even fetching this from the outside world, it's pretty unlikely somebody could use this as an attack injection vector. If you're at all concerned, you could go store the file locally and use that instead.
So I'm assuming that the SHA-256 has to match with what
Yes.
downloaded?
Yes.
If it
Yep.
doesn't, then it errors?
It throws an error as it loads it. Yep.
Your entire build fails?
It stops progressing at that point. Oh, sorry. Your question was, what happens if the SHA doesn't match when it pulls the file? To my knowledge, it will stop. As I recall, last time I edited it to see what would happen. It just stopped at that point. More typically, if you leave it out, it'll say, hey, here's the SHA you need to put in to verify it doesn't change in the future.
And then if I'm creating a workspace file,
Yeah.
do I have to use Python to generate the SHA-256 every time to figure out what?
No. That's what I was getting at is if I didn't have this line and I run the Bazel tool, as it resolves the dependencies, it would say, hey, you didn't put in a SHA. You should have. This is what the actual SHA was. So I've never had to do any work to go generate a SHA with any other tool. And actually, more typically, when people publish rules, they will publish this whole thing. So here, in fact, typically, if you just take this name, oh, wrong, I selected too much. So if you take this name and then you search for it, you typically will find some documentation. You'll typically look at releases. Oh, I chose poorly. On most of the projects maintained by the core team or any teams at Google, in the release notes will be something you can copy and paste, which is more or less exactly this. So I have never had to do anything to go retrieve these SHAs. By the way, to point out just how little you could do, this load command, there's a way to make this point at a local file. I could actually check those things into my project's repository, and I could just load them out of my source code. So I could really get rid of all the remote fetching if I wanted to.
Line 23.
Oh, what? Something I did. I clicked wrong. OK, so.
You just have HA-256 in case you run it later.
There we go. Undo. I need to get rid of this file so I stop getting prompted to save it. OK. So next. There is an oddity, which I think you heard mentioned several times from the main stage yesterday. Someone said something along the lines of, they thought really hard and they tried really hard to make recursive workspace loading work. And there are big obstacles. There are reasons why that's a bad idea. I will not dig into the reasons why it's a bad idea, but the consequence of that being a bad idea is that when I load code into my workspace in the outside world, there's no way for that act of loading to cause that code to go load further dependencies of its own. And so almost every set of rules you'll bring, almost everything you bring in from the outside world, you as the workspace author, and although in this case, you as the copy and paster from the Bazel release notes, if it had better release notes, you have to go basically give that thing permission to go grab its own dependencies. And so that's what's going on here. So I mentioned before, when you use HTTP archive to go bring something into your workspace, that becomes available in your workspace under this name. So if you look at this name and see where it appears again, it appeared right here. right? So I said, go get some stuff. Now it's available in my workspace. Now go load something from inside what I brought into my workspace and go get some identifiers from it. Now, this is another syntactic oddity. So I said a load is really an import. Well, it has a Python-flavored syntax. And so you should think of it semantically as something more like that. It's very common in Python-based things to accept a variable number of arguments. So the first argument is from where I am importing, and then all the other arguments are the identifiers that I'm importing from there. So did that make sense?
So are you selecting two things or giving the same thing two names?
I'm selecting, this is equivalent to import two different identifiers. I guess you can guess what the syntax means, from somewhere.
What if you want to load all of them?
As far as I know, there is no import everything syntax. Bazel really likes things to be statically resolvable. It doesn't like not being able to figure out by looking at a file exactly what's going to be available. So I'm not sure if that's an obstacle to it, but in any event, as far as I know, that does not exist. You have to import the identifiers you want. OK, so we're importing two identifiers from this code. That code itself, we brought in a couple lines up. And now I'm going to invoke both of those things. Now, remember I mentioned that the act of loading a workspace does not allow it to go load things it needs transitively. You have to give it permission. Well, the way you give it permission is you have to invoke the thing that does that loading of dependencies. So that's what line 33 does. There's a concept called the tool chain. I don't think we'll get in deep enough to go over tool chains. I think there was actually a talk either yesterday or today about tool chains. I don't remember for sure. The important thing of the meaning here is that these rules for Go, they contain not only the way of building Go with Bazel, they contain machinery that lets you go obtain Go itself, like the compiler. So the rule expose register tool chains, that can be used to go make not just the build rules, but the tool itself available. So I mentioned that like one of the key things is like this hermeticity, this functionality idea. Well, to be hermetic, to be functional, you really want your compiler to be specified in your build process also, like the exact version of your compiler. And so line 36, or lines 35 to 37 mean go retrieve Go itself. So I intentionally deleted my local installation from Go at one point to verify this really worked. I put it back for reasons, I ended up having to put it back because right now, the copy of Go that Bazel gets to do my build with is not available to my IDE. And I wanted IDE support for Go, so I had to install Go like humanly by myself so my IDE would work. But nonetheless, like even if I had version skew or my version was somehow broken or contaminated, I'm configuring Bazel to use its copy of the Go compiler nailed down to this version. So this is really great. This means that you're not going to like log into a CI machine and make sure by hand it has the right version of Go on it. You're going to nail it down. Because we have a question up here with a microphone.
I can voice out.
OK, I'll try to repeat it.
So when you're specifying, these recursive dependencies, can you specify where they're going to pull the sources from?
Can you? That's a question worth getting on the recording.
Sorry, my voice is a little gone today.
Mine too.
Yeah, so I was saying when you're specifying these dependencies and they're going and fetching resources, are you able to specify where they're pulling those resources from?
That is a great question, which has been under discussion on the Bazel mailing list as recently as the last few weeks, and I'd recommend you subscribe to it. The most naive answer is no, it's just in there. But of course, it's a lot more to it than that. So
Right.
You could fork that repository if you wanted to edit where it loaded its dependencies from. You could interpose a cache or a proxy of some kind between it and the outside world to intercept how it loads its dependencies. So there are ways to do it, but that is one of the current things that people stumble across, is there is not, as of right now, a trivial, straightforward way to redirect all the dependency loading to somewhere local. As you load rules, right now they typically statically contain where they're going to retrieve their dependencies from.
Yeah.
Bazel Federation will fix that.
Yeah, I could see that as a security and also an issue
Yeah.
with performance as well.
So at the Bootcamp level, yes, it definitely is.
Yeah.
Companies doing this at scale, like all the people giving talks about their experiences with giant projects, all have, they just are willing to endure a little more complexity to make it go away. It's not hard if you want to make it go away, but it's not trivial either.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So going back to that previous question, when you say cache, do you mean like in network, like you make it point to like a local like repository, or do you mean like using this Bazel cache that you mentioned in the Bazel RC file, like injecting these dependencies by hash?
So one of the ways you could do it, if you could ensure that your cache was pre-populated with something that had that SHA, it's a content addressable cache, then it would never actually fetch anything from any of the URLs. So if you can ensure that your Bazel cache has all the things that get fetched, then you could actually turn off network access to the machine, and it wouldn't matter, because everything it goes to fetch, it's going to pull out of its own cache first. So that's one of the answers to the question.
Cool.
Yeah. OK. Next, I mentioned that Gazelle. Gazelle is a tool. I'm not going to run Gazelle. I just brought it in so you see a reasonably complete workspace for Go use in Bazel. But Gazelle also needs some dependencies. So this is a pattern. You see this pattern repeatedly. So I brought Gazelle into my workspace. Now I'm going to reach inside it and import a couple of identifiers. One of those will be the means by which it can fetch its own dependencies. And then I, as the consumer, I'm kind of giving it permission to fetch its own dependencies. I would have maybe skipped Gazelle, except for reasons unclear to me. The tooling to go fetch external Go code, like external libraries published on the web in the repository, that machinery is inside Gazelle. It's not inside the core Go rules. And so that bit right there is why I really needed to bring in Gazelle in this example. So again, we're a couple layers deep. Now we're going to go another layer deep. That brought in a rule called Go repository. Go repository is a way of fetching Go code from the outside world according to how Go code is published. I forget. Go has been through like 3 or 4 variations of package management, and I have not been keeping up with it closely because I only do about that much Go development. But fundamentally, this import path says, go fetch this thing off of GitHub. And then this version ensures it's nailed down to a specific commit, tag, branch, whatever. So it's getting the exact code you know it is. Then the checksum verifies that it's right. Now, you might ask, why does this one say SHA-256 and this one say sum? So there's not like this is just one of those path-dependent things, right? Like this has emerged. This is a thing that has emerged into the open source world. So there is some lost to the outside world internal reason why someone gave this a different name. But it's the exact same concept, and you kind of only deal with it once. So it's not a big deal. OK, so only a few people raise their hands on Go, but this is equivalent to the invocation I would use like in a package JSON in a JavaScript project to pull in a dependency, or in a Maven POM if I mention an external dependency being brought in. It's the same idea. It just says, make this thing available to what I compile here. OK, so that's it. One thing you'll note along the way is that most rules in a workspace end up adding some additional named thing available in that workspace. That's why they're called workspace rules. So rules that use in a workspace are, as a group, generally workspace rules. If you hear that expression, that's what it means. OK, any more questions about the meaning of any of this before I move on to try to actually build my Go program? Yeah?
Just a quick question. I can imagine workspace files getting rather large. Is it possible? Sorry. Is it possible to modularize it and import other workspace files into that, or?
So they get large in proportion to the number of different outside things you're using.
Right.
And typically that grows kind of logarithmically by the size of your project. But I'm trying to keep an eye on the time here. It's right about 10, so we're right about at the time of the talk changing next door. So I will pause from, if anyone wants to escape, we can take a break. and if somebody could push the door open for a minute and see if anybody's looking to walk in. Maybe you could go push the door open, just see if there's people waiting out there. Want to be respectful that there is an overall conference going on. Okay, and nobody seemed eager to flee, so we will good. We will carry on. We will take a full break when we get to where the break on everybody else's ad is in. So this is an important bit. Go build, yeah.
Before you run.
So one of the lightning talks yesterday talked about the idea of keeping your workspace file thin. So the idea of loading these other external rules, does it have to be done at the workspace level, or could it be done at a smaller level within Bazel build files? Say you have multiple different languages that you're compiling within a repository or within a workspace, that you wouldn't necessarily need to load Go rules to compile JavaScript and vice versa, that you could isolate those to being build scope to specific modules, not at the workspace level.
There is discussion. You heard discussion on the main stage yesterday about the idea of, could we have like recursive workspaces? You like put another workspace file down inside your workspace and load the extra rules you need for just that portion. And the answer to that was actually no, for really good reasons. The general answer is no. As of right now, you typically, all the stuff that comes in from the outside world is in your workspace, and all your build files about what happens inside your workspace.
Can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, you can put groups of repositories in the Bazel files and load them from the workspace.
I could not quite make it out. I lost your first few words. Try again.
It is still possible to logically group some of the repositories in the Bazel files and load them from the workspace.
Yeah.
So it gets more manageable.
Yeah, I have not done that. As I understand, there are sort of practices that are considered somewhat iffy around that, about loading additional stuff inside an individual build file. There are limitations of where you can call load.
Build files are working at the other stage. They're different from the workspace.
Yeah.
So I think the question was about rather about the organization of the statements.
So you could absolutely cut some of this stuff, put it in another file, and use a load file to run it. So you could absolutely, if this file gets big, you could break it into 10 files with names and bring them in. Yeah. But logically, they're all still in the workspace. That's what I was trying to answer. There's another one over here. That was correct, right? Yeah, okay.
Actually, you could separate workspaces using local repository. So if you want to logically separate like your Go build with like JavaScript build within one monorepo, you could separate using local repository, and that would work just fine.
There are cross-workspace features, which I intentionally do not address at the introductory level. But yeah, it actually is possible to make yourself several workspaces and wire them up together. One of the questions I've not seen any real clear guidance on is how big a workspace should be. I mean, the starting point is to try to get by, kind of build stuff up in one workspace until it hurts. But that's actually one of the questions. Is an open question to me of under what conditions would I start breaking my project into more than one workspace? Or let's say I have a mono repo with 1,000 projects in it. Do I try to put all 1,000 in the same workspace, or do I pick some other layer of granularity? And I don't have a clear answer to that at this point. OK, so this bit I highlighted, yeah.
Sorry, I have
Hello. Sorry, I have one question. You have a tip comment right above this line.
Tell me a line number.
It's right there, 51.
Ah,
So out of curiosity, what does that do, and is that a common Bazel convention? Does that update the actual workspace file with a new sum and version, or what is that tip suggesting?
yeah, that is the line you can use to make this happen without you having to type this up by hand. Yeah, yeah.
Does it actually modify the workspace file, or?
I don't remember. Some of them have a way of running them imperatively where they make an edit. Others like print out a section that you're supposed to go put where you want it. I just don't remember. Again, I'm not a Go programmer, so I'm not an expert on this thing. Yeah, you guys one back here.
Okay, thank you.
In this case, it will update your workspace file. It will read your Go mode and try to update dependencies and update those. If you see Go repository dependency versions, it will update dependency versions and it will update your workspace file.
Excellent. The benefit of asking when there are experts in the room. Okay, so this bit was just to be aware of. Typically in your tooling, that won't make it available like to your local IDE development environment, and so I ended up having to go do this to make my IDE realize that I was using this. And that's kind of a rough edge that there's probably some good solution for people doing it at scale, but it's not like readily in the box. Okay, so we've seen there is one source file. And there's a couple more files. We have not looked at the build file or the other build file. Okay, so this top level build file, this build file was simply generated for me by Bazel, and Bazel needs this build file to run. But since I'm trying real hard to not dig into Bazel here, we're going to skip over that one. And here is the important one. So this is our first real build file we're looking at. So you see the load. You already know what the load means, right? So load means go get some code from somewhere and make it available here. It's an import statement. So if I wondered what on earth this is, I would take the name of it and I would go look in my workspace to find out what it is, right? And again, if I've followed the convention of naming these the way the documentation suggests, if I do a search on the internet, I'm very likely to find the documentation for it. So here I am going out and saying, import that to use in this build file. And then I've made this is the simplest non-trivial example I could come up with because it has two targets, one of which depends on the other. So we're going to define a library and then wrap a binary around it. So library means compile some code and make it usable as a group of things compiled together, although in this case it's a group of one thing. And then binary, this is the naming convention for delivering an executable, like make something someone could actually execute. So my binary embeds my library. So remember I mentioned that often when you see a string in a Bazel file, it's actually a target. So this is an example of a target. So you've seen targets like this one, right? You've seen targets like this one. So this is as good a time as any just to go through the syntax of a target. So a target can point at a certain workspace or a certain repository. That's what that part is. But you can leave that off if you're just talking about something in your project. And then if you want to like orient yourself from the top of your workspace, so if you want to reach somewhere else in your sprawling project other than the directory you're in, then you have to use this section. It starts with 2 slashes. But if you just want to refer to something inside of where you are, you can just give it a name. Or the colon is optional to make it more clear this is a target and not merely a file name. And so this super simple target, this is like maybe the simplest variation of a target, means the target named Go default library in the same module, that's a Bazel word, in the same module where I am. And a module is simply a directory that has a build file in it. So this is a reference to this guy. So again, in a workspace, the name is the name under which the sort of output of this thing is made available. That applies here also. So this Go library, this compiles some Go code into executable Go code. And it makes it available, makes the output available under the name Go default library. And then this binary embeds that into something ready to execute at the command line, and it refers to it. So this is a dependency from this rule to this rule. Now, most of the details here are actually kind of Go-isms, and I don't want to spend too much of our time on Go-isms, because again, I use Go, like this much when I really need certain Go-shaped things. I'm not a Go expert. There's probably everyone who raised their hand knows a lot more Go than I do. But I will point out the Bazel-isms here. So the import, that's kind of a Go-ism, so let me comment that for a moment. So the rest of these are Bazel-isms. That one's a Go-ism. Almost every rule will have a name. That is the name under which the output of that rule can be referred. SRCS, it's one of those path-dependent naming things. Probably if this was created today, it would have been named like source or sources, but it's named SRCS. It means sources. So this is a list of what I'm going to compile. And we'll see a lot more complex variations of that, but this is the shortest form. It's an array with one string in it. And so that refers to this file. Import path, yeah, that's a Go-ism. Visibility, this is a Bazel-ism. This says, from where could this rule be referred? And there's this notion of trying to make your build files expose the smallest reasonable surface to the rest of your project. My project only has one source file, so it doesn't matter at all what I do with visibility. But this is a good practice. Until I have a reason that I would want to refer to just this library from the rest of my project, then I just don't worry about that. And I make it private. And then actually generating the binary, because we will see me run this in a moment, actually generating that binary, well, I probably want to do that from the outside world, from other files, and so I make that one public. And that's a good starting point practice. If you make everything public by default, you'll go to edit something later, and then you'll discover that somebody 37 links away took a dependency on it. And you'd rather have to have a conversation and explicitly make something public if somebody's going to take a dependency on it. OK, so questions about the meaning of this file?
What's the granularity on visibility? It's just public-private. That's it.
There are several more variations. There's one that basically makes it available in this sort of subtree. Is actually the most commonly used. We'll see that come up. If you search the docs, you can go into it. That seems way beyond the scope of intro, so I don't want to dig into visibility in depth.
In the load command where it says //go, that means just one directory up?
In the load, oh,
Yeah.
this right here. OK, so // means the root of a workspace. If I started with // I mean the root of my workspace. If I have the name of a workspace before, I mean the root of that workspace. OK, any other questions on this? Because I'm about to run it. OK, I would like everyone else to try running it. So I learned the hard lesson that if you show people code, that code will not execute unless you have verified it executes. So I actually CI this example material on, I develop it on a Mac, and I CI it on Linux and Windows. So regardless of your platform, you should find this exact thing works. But yet still, there are little nuances. So who has Catalina on their Mac? The timidness of those suggests that maybe people aren't as eager as I would have thought. So in Catalina, Apple thought, hey, let's change the shell, the default shell. The shell that they changed it to thinks it's great to consider 3 dots to be a shortcut to .. /.. so that I can do cd ... to go up 2 directories. And then all of my times I was typing Bazel build ... broke all of a sudden. So if you might be running on a newish Mac OS, you probably ought to get in the habit of typing the name of a target in Bazel in quotes. Now, ... is Bazel's wildcard, so this means build everything. Think of that as being, this is maybe the sort of moral equivalent of what some languages might say, like something like that, to mean like anything, however many layers deep it is. But yeah, get in the habit of using the of quoting those things, or else you will tell people to try the command, and they'll say, I got some weird Bazel error, and it had this in it. And you say, blame ZSH. OK, next, if somebody is running on Windows, depending on how they're configured, sometimes when you mention one of these names that starts with 2 slashes, well, sometimes the Windows MSys machinery helpfully takes away one of the slashes for you on the way into Bazel. So if you, depending on the version you're running, you need one of these 2 commands. So I've gotten in the habit of when I'm saying, until you know you don't need them, if you just stick those commands in, if you have some fear someone might run your script on Windows, this will disable that kind of mangling. So I don't even really have to guess. It's pretty clear that in the environment in which the tool grew up and the syntax emerged, it was on Linux and with a shell that didn't do any mangling. And so it's just, well, whoever designed that target naming syntax got unlucky in 2 different ways, depending on platform. So anyway, these are good practices, good hygiene for how to type these. So if I type, so I know all the commands in this shell script work because these are the ones I run in CI on multiple platforms. So I know that I can run this and it will work. So I will now do so. So I guess I'm going to change into that one directory. So actually, yeah, I just realized I need to do a, there's probably going to be more. Is that big enough? More? Back row? A bit more. OK, is that big enough? How about that? Is that good? OK. So I'm going to run that command. I would encourage everyone to try it, because if it blows up, there's a few people here with me who can help. And yeah, there are some ringers in the room here who have obviously used Bazel quite extensively who can kind of help if it blows up for you. So I have, of course, run this a number of times. So it didn't really have to do anything, because Bazel is really good at knowing whether it has to do work. That's kind of the whole point. So it knows my input, that I haven't edited my input, so it knows not to do anything. And so my build completed almost immediately. I guess what the critical path was 0. That's great. So basically, in this case, all that elapsed was startup time. You'll note that if I run it again and again, see how it gets a lot faster? So the Bazel command I'm running, that's just a CLI. The actual Bazel process is this daemon process that gets started up, and then it stays running. So as long as you're running Bazel commands with some frequency, or if you're using an IDE that has Bazel integration, it's going to be running commands for you with great frequency behind the scenes. As long as that's happening, this daemon process will be running on your machine, and you'll get this very, very fast responses. In fact, depending on the tooling you're using, I don't know if the Go does this, but like the TypeScript tooling can actually keep a copy of the TypeScript compiler hot, ready to compile your files for you again without even launching the compiler again. But not really relevant here in Go. So I'd like a raise of hands if you can do this Bazel build and have it work on your computer. Raise your hands if you have any difficulty or want someone to see if they can help you. So anyone who can offer help to those around them, please do so. Uh-oh. We need help in the front row, too. OK, so while a little bit of help is going on, this is the most common thing you do. When you're just trying to do like does my whole thing work? Well, just try to build everything, right? If you just try to build everything in your workspace, you're likely to discover anything that's broken. If you know what you want to build, then you can ask to build it. And then this is another example of the shortcutting-based syntax. These 2 targets are identical. If you're inside a directory, a Bazel module technically, and you have a rule named the same as the directory, you can leave off the name, or target it. You can leave off the name of the target. So if I look in this, so groceries has a build file, so therefore groceries is a module. And in there, it has a target called groceries. And that enables me to use this shortcutty syntax here. So basically, line 20 is equivalent to line 19. So I know a couple of people are getting help. Any questions on what we're seeing while the help is underway? Flee, flee. Alex has to escape before we get to the JavaScript part. because I might ask him hard questions from the front of the room if he was here in the room.
Did have a problem over here for someone that
Yeah.
he did not have bash on his machine. And so what the command, at least at some point implicitly, it runs bash, and so he was getting a Windows error.
If you run this shell script, line 1 makes the shell script try to execute in bash. I merely typed the stuff inside so that if you copy and pasted the command out and you happen to be on a different shell, it would work. But in fact, you could copy and paste these lines out and run them like at the Windows command prompt. It's either 1.2 or 2.0. One of them, they relieved the need to always have MSys. You can actually have an MSys-free machine, yeah. 1.2.1, okay. There's a lot of Windows rough edges still, though. There's a reason why I develop it on the Mac, and then I debug problems that I hit on Windows. OK, any more questions? Anybody looking up making this thing run? Cool. OK. So in the interest of time, we're going to step to our next workspace. Yeah. You taking somebody? OK.
Two people now who have problems with Xcode, and I don't know Macs at all.
OK, so if you haven't run Xcode, just go run Xcode, like just run it on your Mac, right? Something happened with Catalina and Alfred don't get along correctly yet. So run Xcode on your Mac, and if you have not run it before, a message will come up saying, do you want to install the extra Xcode tools? And tell it yes. And if you do that, most likely you will no longer hit whatever problem you're hitting. Any more questions?
Are we going to go through the generated directories in the workspace?
When we get to like the next more complex one, I'm going to dig into those and just point out some bits and pieces about them. Yeah?
What was the question?
Oh, the question was, are we going to go look at these directories that get symlinked into your directory when you run Bazel? And the answer is, we will look at those a bit as we step into a little bit more complex example. I actually have them hidden in this IDE that I'm running, but I'll bring them up in a way that we can see them. OK, everybody ready to look at another workspace? OK, so now that you've seen one workspace, I'm going to consider everyone in the room an expert on everything we've already seen. So I guess, how far are we in here? We're an hour and a few minutes in. So you are now an expert in those. So I'm only going to point out the new stuff. My Bazel version is the same, nothing new. In my Bazel RC, so again, there's a path dependency here. So this tool emerged deep inside Google many years ago. Like many companies, Google had like corporate computer enterprise management tools available. So if they wanted to solve the problem of make sure everyone in this entire company has the right Java version, they could go configure some computer management tools, just blast the right Java onto everybody's computer. And so when they implemented their build tool, it was super convenient to just assume that every computer in the org has the right Java available on it. That's not a very hermetic thing to do, but it's a very practical thing to do if you're building an internal enterprise tool. So by default, the Java support inside Bazel assumes that it's just going to call the Java on your computer. Well, if you do that today, you get these nice little deprecation warnings saying you're not supposed to do that anymore. So I'm going to show this like this is a future compatible way to do Bazel with Java. And that future compatible way is to assume that a day will arrive and I cannot guess how many versions away it will be, but I will guess at some point a day will arrive when it will say, no, we don't ship with Bazel support. You got to go import that if you need it. Right now, you have to do this bit of gunk here that basically redirects the built-in Bazel Java support to use a copy of Java that you gave it, instead of using a Java on your computer. And so, yeah, you're sort of paying a cost of complexity of doing this. But if you want a hermetic Java version delivered by the build tooling, so you know every build's using that exact same version. There is a way to do that in Bazel, and that's what I'm choosing to show here, even though I suspect that most people using at scale today are not using this fairly new mechanism. They're using the older mechanism, which just assumed you had the right Java version on the machine. Okay, so the precise meaning of this doesn't matter. I put it in here so that I can be doing it in this like future-ready way. Okay, so the workspace file. Everyone's here is an expert, and so they know what lines, well, 1, 3 through 7 mean. This is all stuff. Well, you notice this formatting here? If I hit save, it got auto-formatted. There's a tool you should be using called Buildifier. Depending on how you've installed your Bazel, it might or might not arrive with Buildifier. Don't worry about it now. It's kind of a pain to go mess with it now, live on the spot. But in your real work, go to the effort of setting up your IDE to work with Buildifier so that you get this nice auto-formatting. So like, for example, trailing spaces, look, they just went away. So that's what you're seeing there. So that's not my IDE knowing how to do that. I have a plugin in my IDE, but the plugin just calls Buildifier, which is a command line tool that does this auto-formatting. Okay, so the so-called new Java support. Now, right now, the new Java support is just a wrapper around the old Java support. But again, if you want to not get any warnings or deprecation alerts, you want to like use the official new way to do Java. It's called, not surprisingly, rules Java. You probably saw that rules _ syntax several times yesterday. So this is what you get. If you go to the rules Java documentation release notes, it tells you to put this in. And then, just like we saw with Go, you have to go inside that and load a couple of more things and call them. So you have to give the Java tools permission to load their own dependencies, and then you have to tell them to register their tool chains. That means that basically means wire up to that stuff. Next, I said I want to like deliver the JDK as part of my build. Like we kind of got this by default with Go. It's a little bit of a speed bump with Java. You have to do some extra stuff. And so figuring out the exact extra stuff I had to put in here was not quite as trivial as it should have been. But if you just look through all these lines, the details don't matter much. But basically, I am going and grabbing or making available 3 different JDKs for the 3 different platforms I care about. And again, you have this all in your local files. I'm not exactly sure, but I guess they're using, I guess wherever I got this from, somewhere inside the documentation or discussion, I guess they're using Azul's Java implementation. I did not know that was kind of, is anyone allowed to tell me whether Google uses Azul's Java? Is that a known fact? Is that a secret? I don't know. But the point is, it's not Sun's Java, it's Azul's. So. Next, a Java dependency. So I felt like a Java program that didn't pull a dependency was just deeply unrealistic, right? Every Java program pulls dependency. So the very, very simplest way to bring in a dependency is this rule called HTTP jar. Now, where does that come from? As usual, you do a search. So Bazel tools is where HTTP jars. So it's actually a built-in, it ships with Bazel the ability to go pull a jar file from an HTTP URL and make it available inside your Java code. So again, this is path dependent. This is because Bazel grew up as Blaze inside Google where Java was a super common language. So it's not even, like this ability to get an HTTP jar, it's not even in rules Java. It's in the built-in Bazel kit. I don't know that, I don't know if there's documentation of that or if you just have to go look around to see what's where. But in any event, this is sort of like HTTP archive, except instead of getting an archive and unarchiving it and making it available as a workspace that way, it makes it available as a jar. So we'll see this used in a minute. So any questions about this workspace and what this does so far? Cool. Yeah.
You have 3 different JDKs in there, Windows, Mac OS, and I guess Linux, in the HTTP archive.
Yes.
Will all three of them be downloaded?
So I'm trying to think, I investigated this, and I think the answer was that only when they're actually referenced, but I'm not 100% sure. It's possible that the first time you run this, it'll pull all three, even though you only use one. I got someone nodding yes. Apparently that's the case. I believe I saw some discussion go by at some point about whether some aspects of workspace loading could be performed lazily, but right now I guess it's performed eagerly. I want to try to find a nice way to say this. If you're concerned about bits on the wire or bits on a disk, you're going to have a bad time in many, many ways with this tool set. So you just get used to using up, you should have a lot of bytes of RAM and a lot of bytes on your disk and a really fast pipe, because you're probably going to be fetching a lot of stuff. And like fetching an extra JDK, I work in Node, and our projects have 700 megabytes of Node modules. Pulling all three of these JDKs add up to a lot less than that. And that's like each project I have has 700 megabytes of dependencies in the Node world. So I don't get stressed about it. More questions? OK, so we've not seen, how does it know which one to use, right? So if you look at the adjacent build Bazel file, we're going to see a feature you have not seen yet. So there's a thing called alias. Alias says, I want to make a new name that points to some other name. Well, there is a way of using alias where you're just, it's like a one-to-one alias. But alias lets you use this Bazel built-in feature called select. And the details here don't matter. But the essence is that some stuff gets defined by default, right? So these targets get defined by default based on the platform you're running on. And this right here is the mechanism for picking the correct JDK for what platform you're running on. Now, there's many other ways of using this beyond what I've shown here. I've shown just like a straightforward case of using this to pick the right JDK for the platform you're on. But you could do all kinds of crazy things here. Like you could have it use a local JDK on Linux and a managed JDK on Windows if you wanted to. But in what I've done here, I just downloaded 3 JDKs, and then I used a select to make the JDK target be an alias to the right JDK for the computer I'm on. Yeah?
And to be clear, you did this, or is there like a Gazelle equivalent that can?
So, OK, the question was, did I do this? I started with some bits and pieces I found to try to figure out what the correct way to do it. And then I polished it and edited it until it was as minimal as I could hopefully explain in a training context. So unfortunately, it appears that right now the answer is that each project using Java the new way just copies something like this in. I would not be surprised if some future version of Rules Java does this for you. In fact, I'd find it surprising if it didn't. If like Rules Java version 7.3 or whatever they get to, you might just state the Java version you want, and it just knows what to do. There is great opportunity for things that right now you kind of have to hack your way at to become smoothed out and automated. That's part of that Bazel Federation portion yesterday. It was a shame that Tony wasn't able to be here to give his pitch for it, because that's super important. A whole bunch of things that right now, like we sort of solve ourselves as users of Bazel, are going to get solved for us by Bazel Federation. It's a really great thing. Looking forward to it. OK, so yeah.
Just curious, can you call that alias function in the workspace file instead of build file? Or is there any reason not to call it there?
You cannot. I don't remember the exact reason why you cannot, but you cannot. Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand this Bazel tools SRC conditions. Is it some kind of case or if? Is it sub-function?
So if you really wanted to know, if you would go to Bazel build and then look on GitHub, and then it took me to the Bazel project. Remember what I said? These tools are just like sitting in the Bazel project, right? So look, well, there's a directory called tools. OK, and then it's a thing called Bazel tools, and those are right. Let me see here. Like source conditions. Let's find the conditions. I clicked the wrong place. Script site source third-party tools. I'll just search for it here. Conditions. There we go. By the way, there's a bunch of examples of them using conditions in here. last time I looked at this, I just immediately spotted where the conditions were defined. I don't know. I don't want to get too distracted by that, but basically it's all just sitting there in the source. If you can figure out how to follow the path, you would see where it has a mechanism to make one of these four be defined based on what platform you're on. And then the select mechanism is the way of saying, figure out which of these exists, and if so, go use the thing on the other side. Yeah? Oh, okay. Okay. Anyway, I don't want to get too distracted digging. This is not a dig into the internals of Bazel. This is a, like, get up and running on Bazel. Okay, more questions on what's going on here. Okay, well, we're about to build another thing, and if I time it right, we'll be building when we come up on the break here. Okay, so just like we saw a Go library and a Go binary, like that's not a rule that they have to be built that way, but many of them are built that way. So here is a Java library called hello-lib, and here's a couple Java binaries. There's a mechanism called run files, and I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to dig into the run files mechanism too much. So I'm going to, I'll point out when we get to it when I have to, but basically, we're defining two different ways of running it under two different names. And when you call it this way, I just remembered, I took the run files out of this example, so I wouldn't have to explain it. So there's a mechanism called run files. We will see it briefly in the next example. I have punted on it for this one, because it's kind of irrelevant to a lot of projects. OK, so I've defined a Java binary called hello world and another called hello worlds. The only difference is when you call this one, only one command line parameter is passed. When you call this one, 3 command line parameters are passed. There's not a lot to it. When you run a Java program, you have to give it the main class name. You type Java main class name, so that just appears this way. And then runtime depths, this means when I'm running this binary code, here's some stuff that has to be available. And semantically, it's saying that this code depends on this code. In a more Java sense, that sort of means with that Java library, this thing is going to make a jar. And so this line means go make sure that the jar that came out of that target over there is available when I run this. So that's the semantic of this little bit. And then there's a test, and I don't know. We probably won't look at the test because I don't want to use up all the time on the Java support. Anyway, so let's take a look at running this. So if you look at the exercise file again, so again, I run this in CI, so I'm reasonably confident it will work. You see the same kind of convention again to get around the problems. So if I just want to build everything, and I would encourage everyone to follow along, make sure you go into that to directory, because that's where we're working now. We moved on to our second example. Do a Bazel build. Because I've already done this a number of times, it's all in my local cache, so I didn't wait to download multiple JDKs off the internet. I boldly assumed that sitting inside a Google-provided facility, there's probably a whole lot of bits available over the Wi-Fi, so it might work. Good luck. I was hoping to time this so if anyone wants to mess with it over the break, which is 3 minutes from now, if you have to wait for a long JDK download, it should be endurable. Let's try to use the time in between for Q&A. So questions about this bit? And by the way, I know that I skipped this bit right here, but yeah, go ahead.
The alias, that JDK that was defined.
Tell me a line number.
Line number 5, I guess 6.
Yeah, OK.
Where is it used? I mean.
So I glossed over that, but the answer is this makes a target JDK available. This target is at the top of my workspace. And in fact, my IDE is actually giving me a hint of the name of this target. Where it's used from is actually, this is kind of odd, it's used from over in the Bazel RC. So over in the Bazel RC, where I said I had to do that configuration from outside Bazel, because by default, it wants to go find your system level Java, I told it, oh, my Java is actually defined inside my workspace. So this is a hook that points the Java support back into your own workspace.
Can we go through the parsing?
Yeah, go ahead.
In the workspace file,
yes.
You referenced a jar via jar archive.
Yes.
Am I right that you could have also used, what is it, Maven install? And I
will in the next example.
OK, so it's your choice.
Incremental complexity, yeah. In this example, I did the very simplest way of fetching a jar and making it available. And I just realized I glossed over right here in the build file on line 37, this is where I declared a dependency. And so again, this is that same syntax. So this @ sign with a name, well, that means go look in the workspace to find out what that name means. And then this is just part of the way they've implemented it, //jar gives you the jar file. Okay, we're coming up on break. Another question? Yeah.
My question is about the parsing. So we have the resource files and other things. Can you go through the different layers of parsing that Bazel goes through before it builds or runs?
Like kind of what the life cycle is?
They went through, like, they mentioned something called analysis and then...
Yeah. So as it starts up, it loads your workspace. It has to load your workspace to understand your build files. So then it loads all the build files. It has to parse all the code in all the build files. And that, I believe that's considered part of analysis. But it has to construct a graph in memory of what all targets exist and how they point to each other. There's not much to look at yet in this example because we only have a handful of targets. So analysis of this takes a microsecond or whatever. But that's what they mean. Someone mentioned that that they had, I think they said 4,000 targets in their project. If you're parsing all the code and building up that graph of 4,000 targets, and some of those involve, like here, actually looking at source code along the way, it can start to take a macroscopic amount of time just to look at all your files and figure out what work might have to be done. And that's what they meant by analysis. OK, so we're coming up on break time. I don't want to. So I will try to figure out how do I manage a break without making people lose their break, but letting people keep asking questions if they want. How should we manage that?
Maybe that they can come to you, but then you lose your break as well.
Yeah, well, I want part of my, how about this? We will take, it's like a half an hour break on the schedule, right? So we will officially take the half-hour break, but I will only take a 15-minute break, and people can ask me questions before we resume the official progress through this at the appointed time, 29 minutes from now.
And then we also brought some swag, so
Yes.
if you want some bouncy light-up balls and other things, they're by the door.
Pens, bouncy, these balls are the best. This one, some of them don't flash, some of them are defective, but will make me a liar here. The ones that flash are great. There we go. Recommended. Pens and stickers if you want them. I'm going to pause this, yeah.